In the heart of downtown Mumbai, where the streets buzzed with the usual evening chaos of merchants closing their shops and families heading home, lived a man everyone knew simply as Big Shaq. Standing at 6 feet 4 inches, with broad shoulders and a gentle smile, he ran a small grocery store that had become the neighborhood's heart and soul over the past 15 years. That fateful evening in March started like any other. Big Shaq was organizing the fresh produce delivery for the next morning while helping elderly Mrs. Kumar pick out the ripest mangoes for her grandson's visit. The golden sunset filtered through the store's front windows, casting long shadows across the aisles stocked with everyday essentials that kept the community going. Little did he know that this ordinary evening would transform into something extraordinary, testing not just his courage but also the tight-knit bonds of the entire neighborhood. As the clock struck 7, and the street lamps flickered to life outside, 3 masked men burst through the store's entrance, their intentions clear from their aggressive stance and the glint of metal in their hands. Big Shaq's first thought wasn't for the day's earnings in the register or the valuable stock on his shelves. Instead, his eyes immediately went to Mrs. Kumar, who stood frozen between the fruit baskets, and young Raj, the college student who worked part-time at the shop to support his education. The protective instinct that had earned him respect in the community kicked in instantly. With remarkable composure, he stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "Brothers, whatever troubles brought you here today, we can talk about this," he said in Hindi, trying to defuse the situation. But the robbers, clearly desperate and agitated, weren't interested in conversation. The leader demanded money, his voice shaking despite his attempt to sound threatening. What happened next would be talked about in the neighborhood for years to come. As one of the robbers made a move toward Mrs. Kumar's handbag, Big Shaq acted with the speed that belied his size. Using his years of experience from kabaddi playing days, he managed to disarm the first robber with a swift move, sending the weapon clattering across the floor. The commotion attracted attention from outside. Mr. Patel from the tea stall next door heard the noise and immediately started rallying the community through their WhatsApp group. Within minutes, shopkeepers and residents from nearby buildings began gathering outside, armed with nothing but their unity and determination to protect their own. Inside, Big Shaq had positioned himself between the robbers and the other people in the store. His presence alone was intimidating, but it was his words that truly made an impact. "Look around you," he said to the increasingly nervous robbers. "This isn't just a store. These aren't just customers. This is a family. Our family. There's still time to make the right choice." The situation reached its turning point when police sirens wailed in the distance. The robbers, realizing they were outnumbered and surrounded by a community standing together, began to panic. That's when Big Shaq, despite all that had happened, showed his true character. Instead of taking advantage of their fear, he calmly pointed them toward the back exit, saying, "Go now, and think about the path you're choosing in life." As the would-be robbers fled into the gathering dusk, the story could have ended there. But for Big Shaq and the community, it became a beginning. The incident sparked a movement in the neighborhood. Under Big Shaq's leadership, they established a community watch program, installed better lighting in the darker alleys, and created a support system for troubled youth to prevent them from turning to crime. In the days that followed, the story spread through social media and local news channels. But what caught people's attention wasn't just the bravery displayed that evening. It was the compassion shown in the face of danger, the unity of a community standing together, and the wisdom of a man who understood that true strength lies not in defeating others, but in lifting them up. 1 year later, Big Shaq's store looks much the same, still serving as the neighborhood's beating heart. The only visible change is a small framed photo on the wall, a group picture of the entire community taken during their first safety awareness program. Below it, a simple message reads, "Together, we are stronger." The story of Big Shaq and his community continues to inspire others across the city. It shows that heroism isn't just about physical courage, it's about bringing people together, showing compassion even to those who mean harm, and believing in the power of community to create positive change. In a world that often seems divided, this tale from a small Mumbai neighborhood reminds us that the strongest security system isn't built with locks and cameras, but with bonds between people who care for each other. The morning after the incident, Big Shaq arrived at his store earlier than usual. The rising sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink as he stood before the shuttered entrance, keys jingling in his massive hands. His mind wandered to the events of the previous evening, not to the moment of confrontation, but to the faces of his community members who had rushed to stand beside him. As he pushed open the door, the familiar bell chimed above his head, but today it carried a different weight. The store, which had witnessed such tension just hours ago, now stood peaceful in the dawn light. Big Shaq began his daily routine, but with each item he arranged and every aisle he cleaned, memories of his journey flashed through his mind. 20 years ago, he had arrived in Mumbai with nothing but a small bag and big dreams. His father, a farmer from their village in Gujarat, had saved for years to send him to the city. "Beta, make something of yourself," his father had said, pressing 1,000 rupees into his palm. Those words had become his guiding light through years of working as a helper in various shops, sleeping on footpaths, and saving every spare rupee. The neighborhood was different back then. Streets were darker, shops more scattered, and people more hesitant to trust newcomers. But Big Shaq, with his genuine smile and willingness to help anyone in need, slowly became part of the community's fabric. He remembered the day old Mr. Desai, the previous owner of this store, had called him to his house. "I've watched you for years," Mr. Desai had said, pouring chai into small glass cups. "You help carry groceries for elderly customers, give chocolate to crying children, and never turn away anyone who's hungry. This store needs someone like you." The offer to take over the store, with a generous payment plan, had changed Big Shaq's life forever. As these memories swirled in his mind, the bell chimed again. It was Raj, the college student, arriving for his morning shift. His eyes were still wide with excitement from the previous day's events. "Sir, you've become famous," he exclaimed, holding up his phone. Local news channels had picked up the story, and social media was buzzing with various versions of what had happened. But what touched Big Shaq most were the messages flooding in from the neighborhood WhatsApp group. People shared how the incident had made them realize the importance of standing together. Mrs. Kumar had written a long message about how safe she felt in the community, knowing people like Big Shaq were looking out for everyone. Throughout the day, a steady stream of visitors flowed into the store. They came not just to buy groceries, but to share their thoughts and show support. Mr. Patel from the tea stall brought his special masala chai. The local school principal stopped by to discuss how they could involve young people in community safety initiatives. Around noon, a surprise visitor arrived, Inspector Rathore from the local police station. "We need more people like you," he said, settling into the plastic chair Big Shaq offered. "But what impressed me most wasn't just your courage. It was how you handled the situation without escalating the violence." The inspector's words sparked an idea in Big Shaq's mind. That evening, after closing the store, he invited several community members to sit together and talk. The gathering included teachers, shopkeepers, homemakers, and even some of the street vendors who had been selling in the area for decades. As they sat in a circle on plastic chairs under the street lamp, Big Shaq shared his vision. "Yesterday showed us two things," he began, his voice carrying the same steadiness it had during the robbery. "First, that we are stronger together. Second, that somewhere in our city, there are young people who feel so desperate they turn to crime." The discussion that followed was intense and heartfelt. People shared their concerns, their hopes, and their ideas. Mrs. Sharma, a retired schoolteacher, suggested starting evening classes for underprivileged children. Mr. Qureshi, the mechanic, offered to train young people in automotive repairs. Others proposed organizing sports tournaments, creating a community fund for emergencies, and establishing a mentorship program. But what moved everyone most was when Big Shaq shared his own story, of arriving in Mumbai with nothing, of sleeping on platforms, of almost giving up until kindness from strangers gave him hope. Sometimes, he said, his eyes glistening, all someone needs is to know that people believe in them. As the meeting concluded, there was a sense of purpose in the air. They had formed committees, assigned responsibilities, and set clear goals. But more importantly, they had reinforced the bonds that made their community special. Walking home that night, Big Shaq felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The incident that could have left them fearful had instead awakened something powerful, a renewed commitment to not just protecting their community, but nurturing it. Under the same stars that had witnessed his arrival in Mumbai 2 decades ago, Big Shaq smiled, thinking of his father's words. He had indeed made something of himself, but not in the way either of them had imagined. He had become part of something bigger, a community that stood together, that believed in the power of compassion, and that was determined to create positive change. As he reached his modest one-room apartment, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Raj. "Sir, thank you for teaching us that being strong isn't just about muscles. It's about having a big heart." Big Shaq smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help, and new chances to make their community even stronger. A month had passed since the incident at Big Shaq's store, and the neighborhood had transformed in ways no one could have imagined. The community center, once a neglected building with peeling paint and broken windows, now buzzed with activity from dawn to dusk. It had become the heart of their newly formed Community Rising initiative. On this particular evening, Big Shaq stood at the entrance of the center, watching as young people filed in for Mr. Qureshi's automotive repair class. Among them was a quiet teenager named Rohit, who reminded Big Shaq of himself in his younger days. The boy had been caught trying to shoplift from the store 2 weeks ago, but instead of calling the police, Big Shaq had offered him a different path. "You have good hands," Big Shaq had told him, noticing how quickly the boy had tried to pocket the items. "How about we put those skills to better use?" Now, Rohit was one of Mr. Qureshi's most promising students, already able to diagnose engine problems by sound alone. Inside the center, Mrs. Sharma's evening education program was in full swing. The retired teacher had transformed an empty room into a vibrant learning space, where children from struggling families received free tutoring. The walls were covered with colorful charts and motivational quotes, including one that Big Shaq had suggested, "Together, we rise higher." The success of these programs had caught the attention of neighboring areas. Representatives from other communities often visited to understand how they could replicate the model. Big Shaq always told them the same thing: start with trust, build with love, and maintain with respect. As he walked through the center's corridors, Big Shaq remembered the challenges they had faced in the beginning. Some people had been skeptical, others worried about the cost, and a few had questioned whether their efforts would make any real difference. But the community had persevered. The breakthrough came when they started seeing the first signs of change. Crime rates in the area had dropped significantly. Inspector Rathore attributed this not just to the increased community vigilance, but to the preventive approach they had taken. "You're not just stopping crime," he had said during a community meeting. "You're addressing its roots." One of their most successful initiatives was the Skills and Support program. Local business owners, including Big Shaq, had committed to providing apprenticeships to young people at risk. The program paired practical training with mentorship, ensuring that participants received not just skills, but also guidance and emotional support. The store itself had evolved too. Big Shaq had converted the small storage room at the back into a meeting space where community members could gather and discuss their concerns. He called it the Solution Room, and its walls were covered with pictures of their various initiatives and success stories. Today was special because they were celebrating their first major milestone. 20 young people from their initial batch of vocational training programs had secured regular employment. The celebration was scheduled for the evening, and the entire neighborhood was involved in the preparations. As Big Shaq helped arrange chairs in the main hall, he noticed Mrs. Kumar teaching a group of young girls how to make traditional sweets for the celebration. Next to them, Raj was setting up a presentation showcasing their journey over the past month. The college student had discovered a talent for documentation and had been capturing their community's transformation through photos and videos. The celebration began as the sun set. The hall was packed with community members, proud parents, and program graduates. When Big Shaq took the stage to speak, he felt overwhelmed by the sea of familiar faces looking back at him with hope and happiness. A month ago, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, we faced a moment of crisis. But that crisis showed us something important, that the strength of our community lies not in locks and barriers, but in the bonds we share and the opportunities we create for each other. As he spoke, his eyes fell on Rohit, sitting in the front row. The boy who had once tried to steal from his store was now wearing a clean uniform from Mr. Qureshi's garage, his eyes shining with pride. Next to him sat other success stories, a young woman who had started her own tailoring business with help from the community fund, a teenager who had improved his grades dramatically through Mrs. Sharma's tutoring. The evening was filled with performances by the children from the evening classes, demonstrations of skills learned in various programs, and heartfelt testimonials from program participants. One story particularly touched everyone's heart. A mother spoke about how the community support had helped her son find direction in life through the Skills and Support program. Later that night, as people enjoyed the celebration feast prepared by various community members, Big Shaq found himself in a quiet corner with Inspector Rathore. "You know," the inspector said, "when I first heard about your plans, I thought they were too idealistic. But you've proved that sometimes, the most practical solution is to believe in people's potential for good." The next morning, as Big Shaq opened his store, he found a handwritten note slipped under the door. It was from Rohit. "Uncle, before I met you, I thought nobody cared about people like me. Now I know that everyone deserves a second chance, and I promise I won't waste mine. Thank you for showing me that there's always another way." As he pinned the note on the solution room wall, Big Shaq reflected on how far they had come. The incident that could have left them fearful had instead sparked a movement of positive change. Their community had become a model for others, proving that the best way to fight darkness was not with more darkness, but with light and opportunity. Looking out at the street where vendors were setting up their carts and children were heading to school, Big Shaq saw not just a neighborhood, but a family. Each person who passed by the store was part of their success story, contributing in their own way to building something beautiful and lasting. Word of the community's transformation had spread like wildfire across Mumbai. 3 months after the incident, Big Shaq found himself hosting visitors from different parts of the city almost every day. They all came with the same question: how did you do it? On this particular morning, as he arranged fresh vegetables outside his store, a sleek car pulled up. A well-dressed businessman stepped out, introducing himself as Ravi Kapoor, a prominent real estate developer. "I've been hearing amazing things about what's happening here," he said, looking around the bustling street with genuine interest. Big Shaq offered him a cup of Mr. Patel's famous chai, and they sat in the solution room. The walls, now covered with even more success stories and community achievements, told their story better than words could. Ravi was particularly interested in how they had managed to create such a strong sense of unity. "You see," Big Shaq explained, gesturing to a group of children playing cricket in the street, supervised by community volunteers, "it's not about implementing programs. It's about building relationships. Every person here knows they matter, that their voice counts, that their problems are our problems." As they talked, Mrs. Kumar walked in with a fresh batch of her special laddus. She had started a small business with help from the community fund, and her sweets were now famous in neighboring areas. "Try these," she said proudly, placing a box on the table. "The recipe is my grandmother's, but the confidence to start this business? That came from our community." The conversation was interrupted by excited shouts from outside. A group of young people was returning from their first job interviews, arranged through their skills and support programs new partnerships with corporate offices. Their faces beamed with hope and possibility. Ravi watched all this with growing amazement. "I have 5 housing complexes under construction," he said thoughtfully. "But what's the point of building homes if we can't build communities? I want to help expand what you're doing here." Big Shaq's initial reaction was cautious. They had received many such offers before, some genuine, others merely seeking publicity. But as Ravi shared his vision, it became clear that he understood the delicate balance they had created. That evening, Big Shaq called an emergency community meeting. The community center was packed as he shared Ravi's proposal, funding to establish similar programs in other neighborhoods, with their community members serving as mentors and advisors. The discussion that followed was intense. Some worried about losing their close-knit feel, others were excited about the possibility of helping more people. Mrs. Sharma, ever the wise voice, spoke up, "Remember when we started? We said we wanted to create ripples of change. Well, now those ripples are becoming waves." Rohit, who had recently been promoted to assistant mechanic at Mr. Qureshi's garage, raised his hand. "3 months ago, I was lost," he said, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "This community gave me a chance. Don't other lost young people deserve the same?" His word struck a chord. The community decided to move forward, but with conditions. They would start small, working with one neighboring area at a time. They would ensure that each new program was adapted to its local needs and culture, not just a copy of their model. The first expansion project began in the neighboring locality of Dharavi. Big Shaq and a team of community members spent evenings there, sharing their experiences and helping locals set up their own programs. They faced new challenges, different demographics, space constraints, existing social tensions. But they also found unexpected allies. A local cricket coach offered his ground for youth programs. A retired army officer volunteered to teach discipline and leadership. A group of women who ran small businesses formed a mentorship network for aspiring entrepreneurs. Back in their own neighborhood, the original programs continued to flourish. The solution room had become so popular that they had to establish a booking system. Every success story from Dharavi was celebrated as their own, every challenge faced together. One day, as Big Shaq was mentoring a group of community leaders from Dharavi, a familiar face appeared at the store. It was one of the young men who had attempted the robbery months ago. He stood hesitantly at the entrance, clearly nervous. Big Shaq invited him in. The young man, with tears in his eyes, shared his story. After that night, he had moved back to his village, ashamed of what he had almost done. But after hearing about the community's programs through social media, he had returned to Mumbai, hoping for a second chance. "I want to help," he said simply. "I want to tell my story to others who might be where I was." Big Shaq looked at him for a long moment, then smiled and handed him an application form for the Skills and Support program. That evening, as Big Shaq sat in his small apartment reviewing plans for the next expansion phase, he received a video call from his father in Gujarat. The old man's eyes welled up with pride as his son showed him around the community center through the phone screen. "Beta," his father said, "when I sent you to Mumbai, I dreamed you would be successful. But you've done something even better, you've helped others become successful too." The next morning, as Big Shaq opened his store, he found a group of young people waiting. They were from different parts of Mumbai, each carrying stories of struggles and hopes. Word had spread that this was a place where dreams could find support, where second chances were possible. As he listened to their stories, Big Shaq realized that their community's journey had come full circle. The incident that could have broken their spirit had instead unleashed a wave of positive change that was now touching lives far beyond their neighborhood. Looking at the morning sun rising over Mumbai, Big Shaq remembered something Mrs. Kumar had said during one of their first community meetings: "Sometimes it takes a moment of darkness to show us how bright our light can shine." Their light was now becoming a beacon of hope for others, proving that when communities stand together, extraordinary things are possible. 6 months after the incident that changed everything, Big Shaq stood on the rooftop of his building, watching the sunset paint the Mumbai sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Below, the streets were alive with the usual evening bustle, but something was different now. The change wasn't just in the newly painted buildings or the clean streets, it was in the air, in the way people carried themselves, in the sound of laughter floating up from the community center. The expansion of their initiative had brought both victories and challenges. That morning's newspaper had featured their community in a front-page story titled, "The Mumbai Miracle: How One Neighborhood Changed a City." While the recognition was heartening, Big Shaq worried about maintaining the authenticity of their movement. His phone buzzed with a message from Ravi Kapoor. The real estate developer had kept his word, providing support without trying to control their initiatives. But today's message was different. A major corporate foundation wanted to replicate their model across multiple cities. They were offering substantial funding and resources. Big Shaq's mind wandered to a conversation he'd had with young Rohit just yesterday. The boy, now a skilled mechanic, had noticed some changes in their community programs. "Uncle," he had said, "some of the new participants don't seem to have the same spirit. They come for certificates, not change." Descending from the rooftop, Big Shaq walked through the evening streets. Outside Mr. Patel's tea stall, a group of elderly residents were engaged in their daily chat. Mrs. Kumar was teaching a young girl how to calculate profits for her mother's new vegetable stand. These small moments of connection were the real heart of their success. At the community center, the evening classes were in full swing. Mrs. Sharma's voice carried from one classroom, teaching English to a group of adults. In another room, Mr. Qureshi was explaining the basics of electric vehicles to his automotive class, adapting their curriculum to changing times. Big Shaq entered the solution room, now expanded to accommodate more people. On the walls, alongside the success stories, hung a new section called Voices from the Ground. It was filled with handwritten notes from community members sharing their concerns, ideas, and dreams. One note caught his eye. Written in shaky handwriting, it read, "The programs are getting bigger, but are we getting closer or further apart?" It was unsigned, but the question hit home. In their rush to grow, were they losing the personal touch that made their initiative special? That night, Big Shaq called an urgent meeting of the core community team. They gathered in the solution room, sitting in a circle just like they had during their first meeting months ago. The discussion was open and honest, sometimes painful, but always constructive. "We're reaching more people than ever," said Raj, now heading their documentation and communication efforts. "But sometimes it feels like we're running an organization instead of building a family." Mrs. Kumar nodded in agreement. "Yesterday, a new participant asked me about our success metrics. In my days, the only metric we cared about was the smile on someone's face when they achieved their dreams." As they talked, a solution began to emerge. They needed to grow, but not at the cost of their soul. Big Shaq shared his idea of creating smaller, family units, within the larger community, groups of 15 to 20 people who would form close bonds and support each other's journeys. The next morning, Big Shaq met with Ravi to discuss the corporate foundation's offer. They sat in the store, just like during their first meeting, but now Big Shaq spoke with the confidence of experience. "We'll accept their support," he said, "but on our terms. Every new location must grow organically, led by local leaders who understand their community's needs. We're not selling a product, we're sharing a way of life." Ravi smiled, understanding. Together, they drafted a framework that would allow for expansion while preserving the essence of their movement. Each community would have autonomy to adapt the programs to their local context, connected by shared values rather than rigid rules. The implementation began immediately. In their own neighborhood, they reorganized their programs into smaller groups. Each group had a mentor who had been part of their success stories, people like Rohit, who could share their personal experiences of transformation. The change was remarkable. The smaller groups created stronger bonds, more meaningful conversations, and better support systems. When a young woman in one group struggled to start her beauty salon, her entire group rallied around her, offering skills, resources, and encouragement. Big Shaq also introduced story circles, weekly gatherings where people could share their journeys, challenges, and dreams. These sessions became the heart of their community-building effort, reminding everyone that behind every initiative and program were real human stories. One evening, as Big Shaq was closing his store, he noticed a group of teenagers helping an elderly man carry his groceries. They weren't part of any formal program, they were just young people who had grown up in an environment where helping others had become natural. This, he realized, was the true measure of their success. Not the numbers in their reports or the headlines in newspapers, but the small acts of kindness that had become part of daily life. The expansion continued, but with a new awareness. Each new community that joined their movement was encouraged to find its own voice, its own way of creating change. Some focused on education, others on entrepreneurship, but all maintained the core principle of human connection. As the moon rose over Mumbai, Big Shaq sat in his store, writing in the journal he had started keeping. Today, he wrote, I understood something important. Real change isn't about growing bigger, it's about growing deeper. Every person we touch should feel like they belong, like their story matters, like they're part of something genuine and true. His words were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was the young man who had returned seeking redemption after the robbery attempt. He had completed the skills and support program and was now ready to become a mentor himself. I learned something from you, he told Big Shaq. Strength isn't just in numbers or resources. It's in the connections we build, the trust we earn, and the lives we touch. I want to help others understand that too. Big Shaq smiled, knowing that their community's story was far from over. It was growing, evolving, facing new challenges, but its heart remained the same, a belief in the power of human connection to transform lives, one person, one family, one community at a time. 8 months into their journey, Big Shaq received an unexpected visitor at his store. The municipal commissioner of Mumbai, accompanied by Inspector Rathore, arrived early one morning before the usual rush of customers. The store, with its neatly arranged shelves and the ever-present aroma of fresh fruits, had become something of a landmark now. We've been watching what's happening here, the commissioner said, accepting a cup of Mr. Patel's chai. Your community's transformation has caught the attention of city planners and policy makers. We want to understand how you've achieved what government initiatives often struggle to accomplish. Big Shaq led them on a walk through the neighborhood. The streets that had once been notorious for petty crimes were now filled with small businesses run by program graduates. Outside the community center, a group of women were attending a digital literacy class taught by Raj, who had developed a special curriculum for small business owners. They stopped at Mr. Qureshi's garage, now expanded into a proper training center. Rohit was teaching a class on hybrid vehicle maintenance, his confidence evident in his clear explanations and patient guidance. The commissioner noticed how the students, many of whom had once been considered troubled youth, were completely engaged in learning. The secret, Big Shaq explained, isn't in the programs themselves. It's in making people feel they belong somewhere, that they have a stake in their community's future. When people feel valued, they naturally want to contribute positively. The visit coincided with their monthly community gathering, where success stories were shared and new initiatives discussed. The commissioner sat quietly at the back, watching as community members of all ages and backgrounds spoke openly about their challenges and achievements. A young woman named Priya, who had started with basic computer classes and now ran a successful online sari business, shared how the community's support had changed her life. Here, we don't just learn skills, she said, her voice filled with emotion. We learn to believe in ourselves. The commissioner was particularly impressed by their community voice system, where every decision was made through open discussion and consensus. Even children had a platform to share their ideas about improving their neighborhood. After the gathering, the commissioner made an unexpected proposal. He wanted to create a special task force for community development, with Big Shaq and other community leaders as key advisors. This would give them a direct channel to influence city policies and help other neighborhoods implement similar programs. The offer was tempting, but Big Shaq remembered the lessons they'd learned about maintaining authenticity while growing. He asked for time to discuss it with the community. That evening, the solution room was packed as they debated the proposal. Some worried about becoming too closely tied to government bureaucracy. Others saw it as an opportunity to create systemic change. Mrs. Kumar, with her practical wisdom, suggested a middle path: we can share our experience without losing our independence. Let's be bridge builders. The discussion continued late into the night, with everyone from teenagers to elderly residents contributing their perspectives. Finally, they reached a consensus. They would accept the advisory role, but with conditions that would preserve their grassroots approach and community autonomy. Big Shaq drafted a response to the commissioner, emphasizing that their strength came from being community-led rather than institution-driven. They would share their experiences and insights, but any implementation would need to be adapted to each neighborhood's unique culture and needs. The impact of their decision soon became apparent. City officials began regular visits to learn from their model. But instead of meeting in government offices, the officials came to the community, sitting in on classes, participating in mentorship sessions, and experiencing firsthand the power of personal connections. One particularly moving moment came when a senior bureaucrat attended a story circle session. A young man was sharing how the community had helped him overcome his addiction and rebuild his life. The official, moved to tears, later confessed that he had never understood the importance of emotional support in community development. Their influence began spreading beyond Mumbai. Social organizations from other cities visited to study their approach. But Big Shaq insisted that every visitor spend time with community members, not just program administrators. The real experts, he would say, are the people who live this transformation every day. The community's success also attracted media attention. Documentary filmmakers wanted to tell their story, and journalists sought interviews. But Big Shaq was careful about how their story was shared. "We're not a success story to be written about," he told one reporter. "We're a continuing journey of learning and growing together." This perspective was tested when a major news channel wanted to do a feature focusing solely on Big Shaq's role in the community's transformation. He declined, instead suggesting they film one of their regular community meetings, where everyone's voice could be heard. The resulting documentary captured the true essence of their movement, not as a top-down initiative, but as a collective effort where every member played a vital role. It showed Mrs. Sharma teaching literacy classes, Mr. Qureshi mentoring young mechanics, and countless small moments of community members helping each other. One scene particularly resonated with viewers: a group of former rivals, young men who had once been in competing street gangs, now working together to organize a sports program for neighborhood children. Their transformation symbolized everything the community stood for. As their influence grew, Big Shaq noticed something remarkable. The children of the community were naturally adopting the values they had worked so hard to instill. He overheard a group of kids planning their own mini-community initiative, a reading circle where older children would help younger ones with their studies. Late one evening, as Big Shaq was updating the success stories wall in the solution room, he found a note from Rohit: "Uncle, today a government official asked me what makes our community different. I told him it's simple: here, we don't see problems, we see family members who need help. And family never gives up on family." These words captured the essence of what they had built. As their influence reached policy makers and city planners, they remained grounded in their core belief that true change happens through personal connections, mutual respect, and a sense of belonging. The store's evening bell chimed as the last customer left. Big Shaq stood at the entrance, looking at the bustling street that had become a symbol of hope for so many. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but their foundation was strong, built not on programs or policies, but on the unshakable bonds of community. 10 months after the incident that sparked their movement, Big Shaq found himself standing in front of a mirror, adjusting the collar of his newly pressed shirt. He had been invited to speak at a national conference on urban development in Delhi. The invitation had come after their community's model had been featured in a major social impact report. As he packed his small bag for the journey, memories of his first arrival in Mumbai flooded back, the uncertainty, the dreams, the 1,000 rupees in his pocket. Now, he was preparing to share their story with policymakers and community leaders from across India. But his mind wasn't on the speech he had prepared, it was on the challenge facing their community. The previous evening, during their weekly meeting, tensions had surfaced. The national attention had brought new pressures. Some younger members wanted to create a formal organization with standardized programs that could be easily replicated. Others feared this would destroy the personal touch that made their initiative special. "Promise you won't let them turn our family into a franchise," Mrs. Kumar had said, pressing a small package of her special laddus into his hands for the journey. Her words echoed in his mind as he locked up his store and headed to the train station. At the station, he found a surprise gathering. Community members had come to see him off. Rohit, now a certified mechanic and mentor, stepped forward with a handmade card signed by everyone. "Remember, Uncle," he said, "you're not just representing a program, you're carrying our hearts with you." The train journey gave Big Shaq time to reflect. He pulled out his worn notebook, its pages filled with stories of transformation, challenges overcome, and lessons learned. A news alert on his phone caught his attention. Other cities were reporting increased crime rates and community breakdown. Their model was needed now more than ever. In Delhi, the conference was grander than he had imagined. Experts from prestigious institutions presented data-driven solutions to urban problems. When Big Shaq's turn came, he didn't use the PowerPoint presentation they had prepared for him. Instead, he pulled out his phone and showed a video Raj had recorded. The video showed their community in action, not the programs or statistics, but the daily moments of connection. A group of former gang members teaching cricket to street children. Mrs. Sharma conducting adult literacy classes in the evening. Mr. Qureshi's automotive students fixing elderly residents' vehicles for free. "This isn't a program you can package," Big Shaq told the silent audience. "It's a way of life. We don't see numbers, we see neighbors. We don't create initiatives, we solve family problems together." His simple words struck a chord. During the break, he was surrounded by officials and community leaders, all asking questions. But one conversation stood out. A government minister pulled him aside, sharing how his own neighborhood had changed over the years, losing its sense of community. "We've been approaching this wrong," the minister admitted. "We thought technology and infrastructure were the answers. But you've shown us that real change starts with human connections." That evening, Big Shaq received an urgent call from Raj. A controversy had erupted back home. A major corporation had offered to fund a chain of community excellence centers based on their model. They were promising jobs, resources, and national recognition. The community was divided over the proposal. Big Shaq felt torn. The conference had shown him how desperately their model was needed across India. But Mrs. Kumar's words rang in his ears, "Don't let them turn our family into a franchise." He spent the night drafting a message to his community. The next morning, before his keynote speech, he asked Raj to gather everyone in the community center to read it together. "Dear family," the message began, "I'm sitting in a big hotel room in Delhi, but my heart is in our small streets where real change happens every day. They want to know our secret here. They want to turn our story into a manual, our love into a program. But we know better. As Raj read the message aloud back home, heads nodded in agreement. Big Shaq continued, "Our strength isn't in what we do, but in who we are to each other. You can't franchise faith in human goodness. You can't standardize the joy of seeing someone believe in themselves for the first time." He proposed a different approach. Instead of creating centers, they would create connections. They would welcome visitors from other communities to live with them, experience their daily life, and understand the spirit behind their success. These visitors would then return home to create their own unique versions of community renewal. The message concluded, "Let others build centers. We will build bridges between hearts. Let others write manuals. We will share stories. Let others count numbers. We will count smiles, dreams rekindled, and lives transformed." Back in Delhi, Big Shaq took the stage for his keynote speech. Instead of talking about scalability and metrics, he shared the story of Rohit, from a would-be thief to a community mentor. He talked about Mrs. Kumar's laddus and how they brought people together. He described how their community dealt with problems, not through programs, but through relationships. "India doesn't need more organizations," he concluded. "It needs more families like ours. Not copies of what we've built, but communities discovering their own strength, their own way of caring for each other." The speech received a standing ovation, but more importantly, it sparked a different kind of discussion. Instead of talking about replication, people began sharing stories of community spirit from their own neighborhoods. The conference had become a celebration of human connection. That evening, as Big Shaq waited for his train home, he received a video call. The community had gathered in his store to show him something. They had started a new tradition, Story of US sessions, where young and old shared their dreams and challenges together. "See, Uncle," Rohit said, turning the camera to show the packed store, "we're growing stronger, not bigger. Just like you always wanted." As the train carried him back to Mumbai, Big Shaq smiled, thinking of the laddus in his bag. Mrs. Kumar had been right. Their community wasn't a model to be franchised, it was a reminder that in every neighborhood, on every street, the potential for transformation exists. It just needs people willing to see each other as family. 1 year had passed since the attempted robbery that had changed everything. Big Shaq stood in his store, just as he had that fateful evening, but everything around him had transformed. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating walls now covered with photographs and stories of lives changed, dreams realized, and communities united. Today was special, they were celebrating their first anniversary. The entire neighborhood had come together to commemorate not just their achievements, but the journey that had brought them here. The street outside was festive, decorated with colorful streamers and flowers, the air filled with the aroma of Mrs. Kumar's special anniversary batch of laddus. As Big Shaq arranged the fresh produce, his eyes fell on a newspaper clipping pinned to the solution room wall. The headline read, "From Crisis to Community, the Mumbai Model Inspiring National Change." Below it was a more recent article, "Government Announces New Community First Policy, Inspired by Big Shaq's Neighborhood." The bell above the door chimed, and Inspector Rathore walked in, carrying a folder of statistics. "You won't believe these numbers," he said, his face beaming. "Crime rates have dropped by 80% in our area. But that's not the real story. Other neighborhoods that adopted your community-based approach are showing similar results." Before Big Shaq could respond, a group of visitors arrived, community leaders from different states who had come to experience their anniversary celebration. Among them was a familiar face, the young man who had once attempted to rob the store. He now led a similar initiative in his home village in Bihar. "Welcome, brothers and sisters," Big Shaq greeted them warmly. "Today, you won't see a presentation or attend a workshop. Today, you'll see what happens when a community becomes a family." The celebration began with their traditional story circle, now held in the expanded community center. One by one, people shared how the past year had changed their lives. Rohit, standing confident in his mechanic's uniform, spoke about his journey from despair to purpose. Mrs. Sharma proudly announced that every adult in their community was now literate. Mr. Qureshi's automotive training program had evolved into a full-fledged technical institute, with branches in 3 other cities. But unlike traditional schools, each branch was built around the principle of community mentorship. We don't just teach skills, he explained to the visitors. We build relationships. The afternoon brought a surprise. A group of young people from the community unveiled their project, a digital platform they had created to help other neighborhoods start their own community initiatives. But instead of a step-by-step manual, it was a collection of stories, experiences, and lessons learned. We call it Hearts United, Raj explained, showing the website. It's not about copying what we did. It's about inspiring others to find their own way of bringing people together. As evening approached, the celebration moved to the street. Tables were set up along the road, laden with food prepared by community members. Children performed a play they had written themselves, depicting their community's journey. The story had a scene where young actors portrayed the attempted robbery, but instead of focusing on the conflict, they showed how it had brought people together. During the community dinner, Big Shaq noticed something remarkable. The visitors were not taking notes or recording videos. Instead, they were simply participating, helping serve food, chatting with residents, playing with children. They were experiencing what couldn't be captured in any manual or report, the feeling of belonging. Later, as the sun set, Big Shaq invited everyone to the rooftop of his building, the same spot where he had often stood to reflect on their journey. The Mumbai skyline sparkled in the distance, and closer to home, the streets below were alive with celebration. "Look around," he said to the gathered crowd. 1 year ago, we faced a choice. We could have chosen fear, built higher walls, installed more cameras. Instead, we chose to build bridges between hearts. He pointed to different parts of their neighborhood. There's where Mrs. Kumar started her business. There's where Rohit learned to believe in himself. There's where our first story circle brought tears and healing. Every corner has a story of transformation. The young man from Bihar stepped forward. "When I first came here as a robber," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I thought I had no choice. Now I help others find better choices." This isn't just a community model, it's a way of believing in human goodness. As night fell, lanterns were lit across the street, a tradition they had started to symbolize hope. Each lantern represented a life touched, a dream supported, a connection made. The visitors watched in awe as the entire neighborhood glowed with warm light. The celebration concluded with a new ritual they had created. Everyone gathered in a circle, holding hands. One by one, they shared not their achievements, but their gratitude. The stories flowed, thankfulness for second chances, for neighbors who became family, for a community that believed in them. Big Shaq listened to each voice, remembering how it all began. The attempted robbery could have left them fearful and divided. Instead, it had opened their hearts to a profound truth, that the strongest security comes not from walls and weapons, but from bonds of love and understanding. As the gathering dispersed, the visitors approached Big Shaq one last time. "We came looking for a model to replicate," one of them said. "Instead, we found something more valuable, the courage to trust in the power of community." Back in his store, after everyone had left, Big Shaq found a letter slipped under the door. It was from his father in Gujarat. "Beta," it read, "your mother and I visited the village where that young man from Bihar started his community program. We saw the same light in their eyes that we see in your community's pictures. You haven't just built something in Mumbai, you've sparked hope across our country." As Big Shaq prepared to close the store, he paused at the entrance, just as he had countless times before. The street was quiet now, but he could feel the pulse of everything they had built, the trust, the connections, the belief in each other. A year ago, he had stood against robbers to protect his community. Now he understood that the real protection had come after, in the way people had opened their hearts to each other, in their willingness to see beyond differences, in their courage to believe in the power of community. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new stories, new opportunities to grow. But their foundation was unshakable, built on something stronger than any program or policy, the simple truth that when people come together as family, miracles become possible.